Good afternoon. When I was reading the comments about bleeding the brakes on this 90, it came to my attention that quite a few people have had problems bleeding brakes. Harvey wrote in the comment to say that he bought a Gunson Easy Bleed. I didn't think they still existed, but they do. I had one decades ago, and I thought I brought it to Canada, but I can't find it anywhere. I've moved so many times I don't know where it is, but that's beside the point. I thought I'll make something that's cheap and cheerful and practical for doing not only brakes, but also power steering bleeding. What? And also bleeding your diesel system out. What the hell am I talking about? Well, let's have a look down here. The other day I bought one of these. It's a tyre inflator. So what? Well, it's got everything on here that we need, except the gauge is a bit dodgy because it's already showing it's got 10 pounds in it and it's stood on the bench. But what it has got is it's got a nice lock-on piece here to go on top of your caps here. Now these caps, this I've got different size caps. I've got these. This is for a fuel, you know, and all I do is make them out of valve stems and put a valve in, so that then what you can do is you can clip this onto here, onto the threader there, lock it on, put some pressure down it. Where have you gone? Put some pressure down it, and then presto. Because if you're going to bleed a diesel out, well, you could use a cap like this, same idea, you know, and put some, lock that on, put a little bit of air down it, and away you go. Simple, eh? Or is it? Because if you're going to use it for bleeding the brakes, I thought about taking this one step further. You see, if you get a little bit of an air bubble in your brake lines, the easiest way to find out where it is simply to clamp the pipes. Let me show you a clamp. Well, that was an old customer stopped by, so I don't know where I was. This is about 25 minutes later. Clamps, I was going to mention about clamps. So really you need about 3 clamps, or sometimes 4 clamps, to clamp every hose on the car, on your brake hoses, and clamp them as close to the steel pipes as possible. And then if you've got no air in the main steel pipes, the pedal will be rock hard. Now if you're chasing air in the brakes, simply just undo one and the pedal should still be pretty hard. Now if it's like I say, if it was a drum brake, the drum brakes can be out of adjustment and take up a lot of fluid space when they're expanding, but it doesn't necessarily mean there's air in it, so it might go down just a little bit. So then you clamp that one back up and then go to the other side, same again, and same at the back, and eventually you'll find out why the pedal's going to the floor, and then you can trace it to a particular wheel, and then you're okay. So that's what we do for that. Now, like I say, I make all sorts of caps and things like this. There's one for bleeding ATF through, you know, what ATF, power steering fluid through, on the ZF boxes at the front. All sorts of things. So this thing here could be kind of a handy dandy thing to have. And I thought about it and I thought, it's a good idea if we put a reducer on here to reduce the pressure, because obviously we don't want shop air at 100 and odd pound, blow the reservoir to bits. But if we had a longer hose on here, a regulator on there, I could put this on top of the master cylinder, and with about 1 or 2 pounds of air, just give it a quick encouragement to push this through. It should bleed through. Yeah, should. That's famous last words. I don't know if it's going to work. Like I said, for 25 bucks. Well, it's worth it just for bloody air coupling, really. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this furrow off here, and I'm going to cut the furrow off there, and I'm going to go downtown to get some hose. Now wait a minute, I've just spied something. It might just do. Well, maybe not. I think it's a little bit too big a diameter, but this is the type of stuff I'd like. Because, like I said, with only a few pounds of air pressure, it's not too bad. Many years ago, when I was playing around with stuff like this, I was stuck for a turbo hose, and I made a turbo hose out of this stuff. Not a good idea. When it gets hot because of the hot turbo, the bloody thing disintegrates and blows up. Right, this is the next day. In fact, it's very early. It's about 7 o'clock in the morning. I've got to get a wriggle on, get some jobs done today. But this is the tool that I made. All right. An old pressure regulator. It doesn't have to be fantastic, but you can pick these up in Canadian dollars for about $17, cheap as chips. This bit was $25, and the hose was a big $4, cheap as chips. Now, again, one of the problems we've got here in North America is everything's in inches. So this is 1/4 inch hose, but the fitting is 5mm. Not a big deal, because pair of circular pliers like this, and just stretch the inside out. Little jar of warm water, soak it, push it on, and then you're going to use some clips. Now, some people don't like me promoting tools, but I have to do it because some stuff's really interesting. One of these little kits here is pretty much essential in your workshop. They're permanent bands, so don't think you're going to take them on and off and use them on hose clips. But you've got the option when you want to do some very small pipe fittings, permanent ones. You could perhaps use those on injector pipes. But once you've clipped them on, like this, it makes a nice permanent fixture, and it's not going to pop off. Those sets come with a pair of pliers, a pair of nippers to nip the ears in. I don't know, $12 or something like that for a whole set. It was really, really cheap. And once the set comes with a set of clips, but once you've run out of a certain type, you can buy some replacements. So they're fairly common to get. So I ended up with my hose 20 foot long. And you're going to say, what the hell did you make it that long for, Mike? You're only doing brakes. Well, I am, but as I mentioned before, if you want to bleed through a diesel filter or something like that, you're going to be fannying about, pumping that little wanky thing on your side of your pump. Ooh, wanking and fannying, I shouldn't say that really, should I? But anyway, you're going to be playing around with your pump, and sometimes your pumps don't work, so you can put this cap onto your fuel tank, clip that onto there, and you're at the other end of the car, and you can just give it a quick of air and start to bleed it through. But no more than £5. Don't do more than £5. You don't need that much. Hence the regulator. And don't go off the gauge, because that's worse than useless. I was thinking about taking the gauge off. But anyway, what does it... how much pressure do you really need? Well, just let me get set up and I'll come back. Right, this cap here was to go on top of your power steering container reservoir, and the reason for that was that I was trying to find a leak on an O-ring, and just put a little bit of pressure on it, found the leak. But listen, that's all. Don't use £40 of shop air, blow it to bits. And of course, having the regulator on here, you can always tweak it up a little bit. And don't get a reducer, which is a very, very cheap one, that's just like almost like a valve. They're no good. You want something with a little diaphragm in like this that's going to actually reduce the pressure. So, enough of this. Does it actually work? Let's go and have a look. Right, so I've got the car up in the air and I'm on some steps, but this is the cap that fits here. Like I said, just put a Schrader valve in there, with a tyre valve. That'll clip on. And the nice thing about these clippy things here is you don't have to hold them. Now the next thing is that for the clutch, with a smaller reservoir, I'm going to make a pressure bottle, but for now I'm in a bit of a rush and I want to show you this. But the reservoir in here is quite capable of coping bleeding this through about 2 or 3 times. But all it is just take the top off and top it up with some brake fluid. Now I found out that this little idea here with one of these syringes in with a piece of pipe stuck on the end is absolutely perfect for topping up your clutch, because sometimes it's very difficult to get in pennies, you know, pennies, these things. So anyway, let's go and have a look at an actual thing in operation. Right, so here we have the 2-low-matic here, the regulator plugged into your airline. We've got a gun here, and that hose goes all the way to the front. Alright, so let's zoom in and see what I've got. Now, I got a cheapy brake vacuum pump thing, and I got one of these little containers with it. Now, the container was worth its weight in gold. You're supposed to suck from this end, but it's a nice handy dandy container for collecting fluid so it doesn't go all over your floor. So, as you saw earlier, I only have about 3 or 4 pounds of pressure. So what we're going to do is open the bleed screw, like that. Right, so that's open. And keep an eye on this line here. Now it's not very fast, but it will. I mean, if you want to put more air pressure on it, but don't risk, you could do I suppose, but don't risk blowing up your thing. But you can see now it's collecting fluid in there. And because we're not sucking out of this way, we're not sucking through the threads. Now, somebody did mention about putting grease on there. Yes, you could, but look at that. That's nice clear fluid. You can see in this line there's no bubbles whatsoever. I'm going to just zoom in a little bit more so you can see that a bit clearly, so I'm not lying to you. There you go. And you can see the container starting to fill. Not much, because you don't want to waste fluid, but by observing what's going on in this hose here, you can see there's no air in it. And you can see fluids going through. You can see how it's picking up now. And you're not wasting stuff, because brake fluid is getting expensive like everything else. So what you can do, if you've got a nice clean container like this here, just let me put this down. Clean container, there's some black on it, it's just that wax. But if you keep this, if you're just bleeding through new fluid, you want to change it, you'll get some crappy stuff out. But once you start bleeding, keep this for at least 24 hours in a sealed container, not in this one because it's open to the elements. And let the air get out of it, because there might be a little bit of trapped air bubbles in there, and then you could use it again and put it back in the barrel, but only a last resort. But because you're not wasting all that much, it's not too bad, but sometimes people like to save it, I don't know. So now we can go around the car on all 4 brakes and make sure that there's no air in this system at all, and it's all nice clean fluid coming through. The next step is to put some caps on. Right, so the last job of all is to put some little rubber caps on like that. The silicone rubber, get them in a bag of 100 from Amazon, really cheap, cheaper than sheep's eyeballs really. And that will stop any water and dirt getting into the bleed screw, because there's many a time when you're sort of bleeding brakes out, you think, oh, there's nothing coming out, there's nothing coming out. And the thing's all rusted up inside. And you can use them on grease nipples and all sorts, they're really good to have. Now, one final word about this. If you have been changing all your brakes and you put in, like we've done here, putting new pads on old discs, you might find for a little while that the pedal is soft. The reason for that is that you've got a worn disc or a rotor, whatever you want to call them, with brand new pads on, and they've got to bed in. So the little pieces that's touching is going to act like a bit of a spring, so you might get a springy pedal, but it will go away. It's always best to replace the rotors and pads at the same time, or discs at the same time. But over here in North America land, importing 4 discs is quite expensive, and these were worn, but not that bad. All right, so that's just a little word of warning. But if you want to knock one of those tools up, knock yourself out. Really, it's well worth making. Ta-da.